Beruchim haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together in Daf Lamed Hey Amud Aleph, starting with Lamed Dalet Amud Beis, 15 lines from the bottom at the new Mishnah. The Mishnah is discussing the accessibility of the Eruv on the onset of Shabbos. Nosnu b'migdal ve'ovad hamafteach harei ze Eruv. If a person placed the Eruv in a migdal, which is a closet, and he lost the mafteach, he doesn't know where the key is to access that migdal in order to then get to the Eruv. Nonetheless, the Tanna Kama says it's a good Eruv. The Gemara will have to explain. Rabbi Eliezer omer im eino yodeya shehamafteach b'mekoimoy eino Eruv. Not only if he lost his mafteach, but he doesn't know where that mafteach is. In other words, it's a suffix whether he will find it or not, and it's not in its original place, then it's not going to be a valid Eruv. Says the Gemara Va'amai, asking right away, why is it going to be valid according to the Tanna Kama? How hare, he cannot access it, he doesn't have a mafteach. Hu b'makom echad ve'eruv b'makom acher hu. Granted, we're talking about the migdal is situated in the Rishus HaYochid, and he is being shoyves in the Rishus HaYochid. But still, even though it's in the same Rishus, but he's b'makom echad, he's shoyves in Rishus HaYochid, and the Eruv is another place where you cannot get access to it. So why is it a valid Eruv? Answers the Gemara, Rav u'Shmuel da'amrei travaihu, hocha b'migdal shel levenim askinon. We're talking about a migdal that is made of bricks. And Rameir is the opinion that you can go ahead and take down those bricks and then get to that which is inside of it. This not like it states in the following Mishnah. Bayish shemilehu peiros sosum v'nifchas. If you have a house that is filled with fruit and it's closed, it's satum, and one of the walls breaks, it breaches. So then he says, the Tanna Kama noita b'makom hafchas. You can go ahead and take, says the Tanna Kama, the fruit from the place where there is a breach. Rabbi Meir oimer poiches v'noita lechatchila. Rabbi Meir says you can go ahead and actually take out the wall lechatchila to then access the fruit which is inside of it. I asked the Gemara, Rav Nachum bar Adda Amar Shmuel ba'aviro delivni. That which Rabbi Meir said, the reason why you can access that fruit is because we're talking about leveino that is without tit. It doesn't have cement, it doesn't have connection to the levenim. Therefore, it's just bricks that are piled on each other. And therefore, you can go ahead and access because it's not going to be an issue of muktzah since you can get to that food. And therefore, it's also not an issue of being soiser because, again, the bricks are not with teeth. So how is that going to help us over here? Answers the Gemara, because that's what our case is talking about as well. We're talking about bricks that are not with teeth, and therefore, again, according to Rabbi Meir, you can access in this case, the Eruv. Ask the Gemara, Rabbi Zera biyantif amru avalo b'Shabbos. Still, this was stated in regards to Yantif. In regards to Yantif, then we say that there's no muktzah involved. But in regards to Shabbos, there is still muktzah. Because after all, on Yantif, we say that there's a heter because you want to access a food item. So therefore, there's a heter on Yantif. But on Shabbos, there's no heter. They're not mekil in regards to the muktzah. The Gemara answers, Hachanami b'yantif. Indeed, we're talking about on Yantif here as well in the Mishnah. Ihochi asked the Gemara, Haini diktani Allah. It was taught in regards to this Mishnah, Rabbi Eliezer oimer im ba'ir ovad eruv ve'eruv. If he lost the key and it's in the ear, it's in the city, then it's going to be a good eruv. V'im besade ovad. But however, if he lost it in the field, then ein eruv ve'eruv. It's not going to be a good eruv. Ask the Gemara, v'i b'yomtiv mali ir mali sode. If indeed we're talking about a yomtiv where it's permissible to carry, So then what does it make a difference if he lost it in the field or if he lost it in the city? In the same way that you can go ahead and carry in the city, you can be able to carry in the field as well. Says the Gemara in Daf Lamed Hey Amud Aleph on the top, Chasurei Mechsura. You have to then add the following in this brisa. Nasnu b'migdal v'noal b'fonov. He placed the eruv in the migdal and he locked it. Ve'ovar ha'mafteach, and he nonetheless, though he lost the mafteach, he doesn't know where that mafteach, where the key to that lock is. Harei ze eruv. According to Tanakam, it's a valid eruv. Now the brisa adds, Bamed Devarim Amurim. When is this so? B'yomtiv, aval b'Shabbos ein eruv ve'eruv. We're talking about on yomtiv, where it's not going to be an issue of muktzah, and therefore he's going to be able to then access that eruv. Nimso hamafteach bein be'ir bein besoda ein eruv ve'eruv. But if he finds the mafteach on Shabbos, wherever it's located, whether it's going to be in the ear or in the soda, it will not be a valid eruv. Rabbi Eliezer Omer Be'ir Eruv Eruv. Rabbi Eliezer argues and says if it's in the city, then it's going to be a valid Eruv. Besoda ein Eruv Eruv. But if it's in the field, then it's not going to be a valid Eruv. Explains the Gemara why, according to Rabbi Eliezer, it would be valid if it's going to be in the city. Because Be'ir Eruv Eruv Rabbi Shimon. This is the sheet of Rabbi Shimon that says those items, those places, like the gag, the karpef, and the chotzer, those are considered to be one rishus. So therefore, within the city itself, one can go ahead and carry from the gag to a karpef, from the karpef to a chotzer, and vice versa, because they're all considered to be one rishus. And therefore, if it's going to be in the ear, it's going to be a valid eruv, because you can carry. Whereas if it's in the sod and not, says the Gemara, the Omar echad gagois ve'echad chatzeres ve'echad karfifois reshus achas hein lekelim sheshavs to besoichan. Rabbi Shimon is of the opinion that again, if you have gagos, chatzeros, and karfifois, they're all in the same reshus. You can carry one to the next, providing that the chayfetz was in one of those places on the onset of Shabbos. But if it was instead in the bayis before Shabbos, that you can't bring from the bayis to the chotzer or the bayis to the gag without an eruv chatzeros. Besode in eruv k'rabbanan. And therefore the Gemara concludes over here in the brisa that in the sada you could go ahead and, but in the sada rather, ein eruvoi eruv k'rabbanan. Unlike the ear, which we just said is like Rabbi Shimon, and you go ahead and carry, therefore it's going to be a valid eruv. But in the Sadeh, here we're saying it's like the Rabbanon in that since there's an Isser de Rabbanon on the onset of Shabbos, an Isser Shvus, even though B'makam Mitzvah is Asr according to the Rabbanon Ben Hashmashos, unlike Rebbe's opinion that we learned until now in other places, in the previous Mishnah, here the Gemara states that this brisa is going like the Rabbanon, that when it comes to an Eruv that is placed in the Sadeh, since a Sadeh has a din of a Karmelis, therefore on the onset of Shabbos you cannot carry from the more than Dalet Amos in the Karmelis, whereby it's not accessible and therefore it's not going to be a valid Eruv. Says the Gemara, Vaiter Rabbi Rav Yosef Zamar Chavayu. They say a different mahalich to explain our Mishnah. The first mahalich we said that we're talking about an Eruv that was in a migdal of Levanim. Now, Rabba and Rav Yosef explain otherwise. Hacha b'migdal shel eitz askina. We're talking about a migdal, a closet made out of wood. And we're talking about where it's beyond our boim saw. And here explains Rabbi Rav Yosef. The mar sava klihu ve'ein binyan bekelim ve'ein stira bekelim. Umar sava oyelhu. The Tanakama that says that it's valid explains that it has the status of a kli. And although it's greater than our boim saw, the oyel, it has a din of a kli because it's not connected to the ground, it's movable. And therefore, since there's no binyan and stira bekelim, you go ahead and break open this migdal to access the eruv. Whereas, according to Rabbi Eliezer in our Mishnah, he holds that since it has more than our boim saw, then it has the din of an oihel, and therefore it would be usher to then go ahead and break open this oihel, this migdal. Ubepedukta dahani tanoi. The Gemara suggests this is the machloikis of the following tanoim. This nan hikish al gabe shida teva umigdal tmein. If a person who's a zov, he has a tumor of a zov, and that zov takes, let's say, his fist, and he puts a glove on his fist, so he doesn't actually touch the shida teva migdal physically, but he hits it with his fist, causing the shida teva migdal to move. Says the Mishnah, Rabbi Nechem Rabbi Shimon mitaharin. Unlike the Tanakam who says it's tmeim, Rabbi Nechem Rabbi Shimon would say it's tahor. What's the machlokes? Haray the zov, he hit the shida teva migdal and he caused it to move. Why does the Tanakama say it's tmein, whereas Rabbi Nechem and Rabbi Shimon say taharin? Says the Gemara, my lad behakam miflik. What is their machlokes? Mar save klihu umar save oyalu. The Tanakama holds it's a kli, and therefore when he moves it as a tumah of heset, thereby as a kli that moves, it's going to become tameh. Whereas Rabbi Nechem and Rabbi Shimon hold that it's an oyel, and since it's an oyel, as a din of an oyel, it doesn't become tameh. Omar Abaye v'tizbro. Abaye says, you really think that's the explanation? V'hatani, behold, we have a brisa. It says oyel v'nisat tameh. Even an oyel that moves, in the case of a zav that moves it, so it will become tameh. Kli ve'eno niseit tor. Whereas a kli, if it does not move, then it's tor. In other words, if you have an oil that's not strongly connected to the ground and it moves by the zav, so then it becomes tameh. If it's a kli, because it's very heavy and it doesn't move, so then it's tor. It doesn't become tameh. So we see over here, it's not tolui on the fact that it's an oil or not. Even an oil will become tameh if it's going to be moved. Viktani safe, and it's taught also in the safe of the imhayu nisaitin tmein. That which we said before, when the zav takes his fist and he hits the shida teva migdal with, we said, a glove. He's not actually physically touching it, but he's hitting it, so there'll be a heset. So there it states over here, imhayu nisaitin tmein. If he moves the shida teva migdal, then it's going to be tameh. That means that there's no machlokes about that. Zaklal niseit machmas koichay tameh. If it moves because of persons, the zav's direct efforts, the direct koyach, then it's going to be tameh. Machmas ra'od dator. But if he causes a trembling, he causes a vibration, then that's going to be tahor. So therefore, Abai says it cannot be the machlokes in this Mishnah is going to then be the same machlokes that you're suggesting in our Mishnah. Elo Amar Abai, rather the kuli ama heset machmas koichay tameh. Because in that Mishnah that you quoted before, everybody agrees that if it moves, the object moves because of the zav directly, because of his own koyach, then it's going to be tameh. Machmas re'od dator. If it's going to be moving because of the vibrations, that's going to be tahor. V'hocha, but over here, what is their machlokes? B're'od machmas koichay askinon. Whether it moves, meaning it doesn't actually move, but it moves in its place, it trembles, it vibrates in its place. Do we say that that is a din of going to be heset, and therefore tameh, or not? B'hakam miflagi, the mar sava have a heset, or mar sava lo have a heset. The Tanakama says that's heset, even though it didn't actually move from its place, it only moves in its place as it vibrates. That's enough to be considered to be heset, to become tameh. Whereas Rabbi Nechemya, Rabbi Shimon, they hold that it's tahor. Umasnisim, but what, going back to our Mishnah in regards to the Eruv, what is the machlokes? After all, we're just saying now that can't be the same machlokes. Masnizim and my commitment law. How do you explain the machlokes over here in our Mishnah? Abai v'rov damri travayu. They both say b'minol b'manu v'kotir b'misno askinon uboy sakina lemifseke. We're talking about where it was locked, but it also had a rope that was tied to to the lock, whereby if you were to then cut open the rope, you'd be able to then access the Eruv. And in order to then cut open the rope, you would need a knife. So there's a machlokes whether you can use a knife, a typical knife that's used, let's say, to cut meat or not. Is it considered to be muktzah or not? Says the Gemara, Tanakama sover lo Rabbi Yosi, Domer kol hakelim nitolim b'Shabbos, chutz mi mesamar masar hagodol v'yeset shevel achareisha. Rabbi Yosi is of the opinion that all kelim are not considered to be muktzah, with the exception of those that a person is very particular about, because he might get ruined, and because of their expense, and they're concerned that they would get ruined, they can't be used. For example, a large saw, or the knife of a plow. Those are things that can get ruined if they're used for other things, and therefore they're muktzah, machmas chisaron kis. And therefore the Tanakama holds like this opinion, that you can take a knife, even though the knife is normally used for cutting bread or meat or cheese or whatever, you can use that same knife because it's a kli, and use that kli that's not muktzah to then cut a rope. It's a kli shemalachta leheter. Rabbi Eliezer sover like Rabbi Nechemia, whereas Rabbi Eliezer says, no, I hold like Rabbi Nechemia. Nechemia has a special opinion in regards to muktzah, that even a typical knife that's used, let's say, for food, for cutting bread or cheese or meat, that can only be used for then cutting food. You cannot use a knife for other purposes, as follows. Domer afilu talis, afilu tarvad, even a talis, a beged, or a spoon. You can only move them for their intended purpose, and therefore they cannot be used, in this case, a knife to cut a rope. The Gemara now brings the next Mishnah. We know when it comes to the Eruv, it has to be Kayom on the onset of Shabbos. Says the Mishnah, Nisgalgel chutz litchum, if you have the Eruv that rolled away from the Tchum, in other words, it requires that the Eruv be placed within the Tchum of the 2,000 Amos, and then you can extend the 2,000 Amos from there. So if it was placed on the onset of Shabbos within his Tchum, but then it rolled before Shabbos actually came in, before the Ben Hashmoshois, or Nafal Alav Gal, or rocks, boulders, then fell on top of the Eruv, were made it inaccessible, except if you would do a malacha, or nisraf, or was consumed by a fire on the onset of Shabbos, or truma v'nitmes, or it was truma that became tameh, whereby it's even prohibited by a kohen to eat, so nobody can eat that truma. So if it's mibod yom eino eruv, if it happened before ben hashmoshois, then it's not going to be a valid eruv. If it happened after nightfall, however, then it will be a valid Eruv, because from the onset of Shabbos, the Eruv was in place. Only subsequently it rolled outside, or it became consumed by a fire, whatever it is, but it was already then koine shvisa. Im sofek, however, if it's a doubt, so then there's a machlokes. Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, oimim hareze chamar gamal. What's a chamar gamal? Chamar is that a person who wants to then manhig a chamar, a chamar, so then the way he drives it is behind, he pushes, he leads it. Whereas the gamal, he has to pull it. So here we're talking about there's a situation where a person who then has a bias, let's say, and he has 2,000 amos in all directions. So he wants to go to the east another 2,000 directions. So he wants to set his eruv techumin to the east right before 2,000 amos, so then he can extend to another 2,000 to the east. So here, since it's a suffix, so before the suffix, so in that situation, if he was successful, then he would have 2,000 amos in all directions. In other words, he would have 2,000 amos to the east, plus another 2,000 amos to the east, and then from that place where he set the eruv, not only to the east, but also up north and south, he would have also 2,000 amos, as well as, of course, to the west where he came from. Whereas he would not be able to then go at all to the west of the bias where he started off from. That's a normal, typical situation where the Eruv was chal. Here it's a suffix. We don't know whether the Eruv will be chal or not. So therefore, according to this opinion of the Tanakama, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, Thereby, we have to say that only that area that is combined, that is a mishutaf between the bias and the place where he would then put the Eruv, is going to be valid. In other words, the 2,000 amos between the bias and the Eruv, that would be accessible. That would be a place where you can walk, but he would not be able to go to the west of the bias, he would not be able to go to the east of the Eruv, because it's a suffix. He'd only be able to go those 2,000 amos that is combined, that is shared between the two of them. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon, Oimrim, Safek Eruv kosher. If it's a Safek Eruv, it's still kosher, and therefore he can use that Eruv. In our scenario, he can then go 2,000 amos to the east of the Eruv and 2,000 amos to the west between the Eruv and the bias, and so on. Rabbi Yossi, Avtulo Mois Heid Mishum Chamisha Zkenim. He was made in the name of 5 Zkenim. Al Safek Eruv Shekosher, on a Safek Eruv, like the latter opinion that it's kosher. Says the Gemara, Nisgalgel Chutz Litchum, in the case that we said that the Eruv rolled outside of the Tchum, Omar Rava, Lo Shonu Elishin Nisgalgel Chutz La'arba Amos. Rava qualifies and says, Aliba de Emes, it had to go even more than Dalet Amos. Why? Because a person who makes the Eruv, he has Dalet Amos around him. And therefore, if he made the Eruv on the end, right before the end of the Techum, he has Dalet Amos that extends. So it had to roll beyond Dalet Amos outside of the Techum. Aval l'toich Dalet Amos, if it's within that Dalet Amos, even if it rolled, let's say 2 Amos, Hanoisin Eruva Yesh Lo Dalet Amos is going to then be valid. The next part of the Mishnah said, if a Eruv had a boulders, rocks that fell on it, then that Eruv on the onset of Shabbos was invalid because you can only access it in a way that's going to be a Isser way, and therefore it's not going to be a good Eruv. Explains the Gemara. According to the Havamim, we're suggesting that if he wanted to then access the Eruv, then he would be able to do so. In other words, he would then go ahead and do an Isser of, let's say, Muktzah, by taking his hands and removing the rocks, which are Muktzah. So Leima Masin Look Rebbe. Let's then suggest that it's not like Rebbe, because Rebbe, we know, says that when it comes to a Shvus, B'makom Mitzvah, it's Mutter Ben HaShmoshes, they were Mekil, that one can then be over there's no rabbinic enactment. It's not going to be an Isser of Shvus during Ben HaShmoshes. So this must not be going like Rebbe. The Ik Rebbe, the Omar, called David Shu Bishum Shvus Lo Gazru Allah Ben HaShmoshes. Answers the Gemara, no. Afilu Tema Rebbe. This even can go like Rebbe. Why? Because here we're talking about that you cannot access the Eruv by just merely moving the rocks with your hands. No, you need to get kalim, you need to dig. And that would be already an Isser De'araisa. If it's in a Sodeh, it would be an Isser Charisha. If it's in a Bayis, it would be an Isser of Boina. Says the Gemara. You would need a shovel or a pickaxe in order to then get to that Eruv. And therefore, that would be digging. That would be a problem. And Isser De'araisa, and even Rebbe would say that would be prohibited. Now the Gemara says we need both of these two cases in the Mishnah. The first case being that the Eruv rolled outside of Dalet Amos from the end of where it was situated on the onset of Shabbos, and the second one being that a gal of Avonim then covered up the Eruv. And we need both cases. The Itanan is galgil mishum de Lesin gabe. If I only taught the case where the Eruv rolled away, so I would say it's not here, it's outside, and therefore it's not valid. Avon nafal alov gal the ise gabe emol lehave Eruv. Whereas the case where the rocks covered up the Eruv, I say it's still there in the proper place, and therefore it would be valid. So therefore I need to teach that case. And if I taught the case that the stones who covered up the Eruv, that's not valid because I can't access the Eruv since it's covered up by the stones. But in the case where the Eruv was then rolled away, Zimnin the Asi Ziko Maisile. And then I could say perhaps that maybe a wind will then bring it back to its proper place. and therefore it's a valid Eruv. Tzricha, therefore we need both cases to teach us that in both scenarios the Eruv is invalid.